September morning, leaves autumn gold. Come and behold. Against the sky, whispered words of hope. Come and behold. Come and behold. Come and behold.
You can join me on the come and behold part. It's pretty simple, honestly.
Bagpipes playing amazing grace. Come and behold. Candles lighting up each and every face. Come and behold. Come and behold. Come and behold. We thought that summer would never end, and here we are, touched by love again. What we had, now we had to say. Crush a rose, pluck a grape from the vine. Come and behold. We move forward one step at a time. Come and behold. Come and behold. Come and behold. Come and Come and behold. Come and behold. Come and behold. Come and behold. Come and
Thank you, Joe. My sermon needs a little preface this morning to tell you what I've been doing for the last week. From Monday through Friday, I was on a retreat with about 26 other young, new clergy. Maybe between the ages of, I think, about 25 to 37, all in the first several years of our ministries. And for 4 years, twice a year, this group gets together on biannual retreats and learns about different styles of ministry together, supports each other, hears about the ministries in our different areas. And so this last week, I got to be in San Francisco on this lovely retreat and had a great time with my fellow peers and clergy. So before this last week, I associated the name Anne Lamott with various other women Christian writers. Most of my seminary and clergy peers knew about her. Many have read her works and quote her every once in a while. Pastor Chuck has preached a sermon series on her book, Help, Thanks, Wow, on different types of prayer. She's known. However, I had not personally read any of Anne Lamott's books. I really didn't know much about who she was or why she writes. I really didn't know much about what she writes about, even, other than that vague Christian kind of topic. Her name meant something to me, but that something really wasn't very meaningful without having all of that other context around who she was. That was until I met her. Can you all see that? Anne Lamott is there, pretty much in the middle of that picture. And that is our group as we met her. We were a group of 27 young clergy, 7 older mentors, Anne Lamott, and her pastor, who's sitting right there to the left of her, Reverend Veronica Goines. We pulled up to her church. I was in the last little minivan of folks that came up, and we parked right next to where Anne Lamott was slowly getting out of her car, out of her Subaru Outback that fit just as well in San Francisco as it does in Colorado. We piled out of the car, and she greeted us casually as she continued to pull things out of her car and close it up, and then we all walked towards the small church together, chatting casually with Anne Lamott. Eventually, all 36 of us settled down in a circle that we had pulled the chairs around, and she just started talking. It wasn't a big presentation. It wasn't her standing at a podium like I am in front of you. It just felt like she was having a conversation with us. It just happened that that conversation only included her talking for 20 minutes and then another 15 minutes after one question was asked. I heard her story for the first time in that conversation. Anyone who has read her books before knows it well, but it was the first that I'd heard. She described herself openly as an addict to anything and everything that would provide her mood alteration, she said. Alcohol, drugs, sex, texting, pleasing people. Eventually, she came out of fully relying on those addictions and came to believe in God. And the depth of her spirituality is fully embedded in the books that she writes and in the words that she spoke to us when we met her that Tuesday. At the end of our time with her, it didn't feel particularly like I had had this life-changing experience, or even like I had just sat down with one of the greatest spiritual thinkers and writers of our day. It didn't feel disappointing exactly, but there was something kind of along the lines of, that's it? But then I realized over the next few days as I began to process that and as I was talking with my peers and thinking about ministry, that everything I was thinking went back to something that Anne Lamott had just said. Things that I had written down as just little quotes on my piece of paper, and realized just how pivotal, how important those things that she said were. Phrases like, "Figure it out" is not one of our slogans. Showing up is. We show up for each other. Statements like, "You are loved and chosen." That sentence that she says to each child that she teaches Sunday school to every Sunday morning. Ideas like mood alteration, cravings, that sometimes we need just the snap of a rubber band that addicts sometimes use to redirect away from unhealthy giving in to whatever that is for any of us. Practices in the church, like remembering not to hassle people, telling visitors that maybe this isn't your place, or maybe you don't live in town, but we can help you find somewhere else, wherever you need to be. We don't need you to pick us, but we have found the way. We have found the truth. Annie Lamott is an extraordinary person, and now I have the truth of her to go along with her name, Annie Lamott, that didn't mean much before, But now, not simply because I've met her, but because she shared who she is with us. Her name means so much more. Well, you might be thinking, that's a lovely story about Anne Lamott, but what in the world does it have to do with the third commandment? Some of it's just a lovely story. It was great to meet Anne Lamott. But this third commandment that we have in front of us, most commonly known as don't take the Lord's name in vain. And the way that our translation has this morning, don't use the Lord's name as if it has no significance. While we think about that commandment, I want you to think about something for yourselves this morning. Think about your own name. Think about what you want it to be associated with. What would it mean for someone to use your name wrongly? Someone to tarnish your name? Or what would it mean for someone to know the truth of your name? The truth of who you are, learning the truth, just like I learned the truth of Anne Lamott by learning who she was, by her openly sharing her story. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. I would bet that most of us here have had a fairly simple understanding of it, at least to begin with, of what that means. Basically, don't use God's name as if it was a curse word, right? Don't use it if you're not actually calling on God for something. It's a pretty easy understanding, and I think it is true. It's easy to teach to kids. It's easy to point out to ourselves or our teenagers who use Jesus Christ, or even, dare I say it, God damn it, to show displeasure with a situation. We use those words all the time, whether or not you are sitting in this congregation as a Christian or not. It's easy to say, don't use the Lord's name in vain whenever you use that word, God, to mean something else. And yet in the sermon series, in which we are looking a little more in depth about these 10 commandments, we have to ask whether there's any more to that understanding of our third commandment. Is there anything deeper than that? Well, I hope that something that we learn together is that there is another way of understanding it. And I hope that today we get to take more seriously the words and the names that we use and the things that we live by. Don't use the Lord's name as if it had no significance. Well, why not? What's in a name? That cultural question comes first from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. When Juliet asks, "What's in a name?" That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Is that true? Well, a rose does, in fact, go by many other names. All of those are, if you can't see it, different languages and different ways of saying rose in different languages. Some of them are similar to each other. They have the same kind of sound. Some of them are completely different. Gull is one of them. Yeah, lots of different ways. Do they all signify the same rose? Does the same rose smell as sweet? Similarly, God does not go by God in every language. In Spanish, God is Dios. In Malay, Tuhan. In Zulu, Nkos. And of course, as we learned earlier, God is not actually a name. God is a generic word for any and all deities that became a proper noun when Christians started using it for this monotheistic religion that was trying to avoid using the other understood name of the Hebrew God. Ready, kids? Yahweh. Yahweh, or YHWH. That's it, transliterated from the Hebrew. Those Hebrew letters that are written from right to left in the Hebrew. We need to learn something about these 4 letters that are called the tetragrammaton in Hebrew. I want you to remember this. Are you paying attention? Because I bet that many of you have heard other ways of understanding this word, and I bet they're wrong. So, this name for God, Yahweh, it's only one of several names that are used in the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament for God. It is the one that is used most often and the one that became understood above all others, the name for God. And I've heard people say that those letters, that word, doesn't have any vowels because it was supposed to be that way, because it was supposed to be unpronounceable. It was too sacred to be said out loud. That is not true. That word doesn't have any vowels because the Hebrew written language doesn't have any vowels. No word written in Hebrew uses vowels. Just like in the words that we have come from our Greek, we give capital letters and we space out our verses. In the same way, we have changed the Hebrew words over time. We've put dots in the Hebrew language to signify what vowels should be used to pronounce those. But even today, vowels are not part of that Hebrew language. In addition, Jews used that word. They spoke it aloud when it was first used. And then, at some point, between the 10 Commandments and the time of Jesus, maybe even as late as the 3rd century BCE, mainline Judaism began to believe that that word shouldn't be spoken. And so they stopped. But then, without that oral tradition that they had used to know how to pronounce words before, without that to guide them, later generations forgot how to pronounce these letters in front of us. Yahweh is the best educated guess based on writings from other languages and other cultures that were writing about this Hebrew God. And so we come to know Yahweh out of these 4 letters. We come to know the name of God. So what did this name for God mean? As the Jewish Encyclopedia has it, like other Hebrew proper nouns, the name of God is more than a mere distinguishing title. It represents the Hebrew conception of the divine nature or character and of the relation of God to his people. It represents the deity as he is known to his worshipers and stands for all those attributes which he bears in relation to them and which are revealed to them through his activity on their behalf. A new manifestation of his interest or care may give rise to a new name, so also an old name may acquire new content and significance through new and varied experience of these sacred relations. In other words, the name of God means a relationship. The name of God that has been given and passed down means something that we can understand about God through the way God interacts with us. The literal meaning of those letters in the base form, we'll get there. And the masculine form of the word is just, he is. Does that sound familiar? I am who I am. He is, or it could even be he will be. It could even just be he lives. The base word is simply to be. And so we have the being of God. In other words, Yahweh is the living God, the God of new creation, the God of transformation, the God of everlasting love, of everlasting life. The living God, as opposed to the lifeless gods of the Egyptians or of the people, the Canaanites, with whom the Israelites would come to live. Our word, our name, God, may not be that formal personal name that was first known for the God of the Israelites, but we have come to use it as such. We have given the name God reverence over time, and though we use it both casually and reverently, it's the main signifier for this living being that we have as English-speaking Christians. We use God to signify everything that God means for us individually and corporately. We use other symbols, like Father, where did Ian go? like Father to represent the name of God. We use the words that characterize our God in relationship to us. We use words like shepherd, Father, Creator, Mother. We use these words and signifiers because they represent that relationship with who God is for us. God's name is important to us. But some hear the name God, and it doesn't have the same meaning for them. The relationship that name portrays to them is one of abuse rather than protection. They hear it in the context of God damn it. They hear it in the context of God-given rights that somehow seem to only protect a few and not the many. They hear it in the context of God says that you are not good enough to be Christian. They hear it in the context of God doesn't like who you are. In those contexts, the name God is still imbued with meaning, but it might not be the meaning that the living God would choose. In fact, in those contexts, the name God is more aligned with death, with a human's limitation on love, with a small, boxed, packaged, and sealed human understanding of what God is and what God is not. So does it hurt Christianity to use the names God or Jesus Christ as swear words? Yeah, I would say so. But I don't think those hurt it nearly as much as Christians who use the name of God to support racism and prejudice. It doesn't hurt Christianity as much as the name of God in ways that limit the awesome, eternal, ever-transformative, ever-creating power of the living God, of Yahweh, the God who lives. I think Anne Lamott would agree. I think that Anne Lamott, a woman who calls herself addict, would say, as she says to each child in the Sunday school class that she teaches, that God's name means that you, whoever and wherever you are loved and chosen. Don't use God's name to limit God. Don't use it to abuse others or to keep anyone out. Use God's name to speak the limitless power of the living one in all things, to pronounce to anyone and everyone that they are loved and chosen by the living God. Amen.